What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, November 30th, 2016, last day of the month here, starting December tomorrow, and just all kinds of things going on here today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to be taking very many phone calls because we have got so much news to get through, and probably third hour is when you should think about calling on in with your comments and questions. Meanwhile, Mike is in our control room keeping us out of trouble, and we're about to go. All right, well, Jill Stein, just under the deadline, filed for a presidential vote recount request in Michigan. And everybody is trying to figure out what the heck is going on, because Jill Stein cannot win the presidency with recounts in 3 states. She's acting as a front for Hillary Clinton. Now, Michigan already had a hand recount. The margin was so tight there, state law mandated a recount by hand. They've already had it. Okay? And Jill Stein is justifying her demand for a recount on the basis that there were some blank ballots found somewhere. That's it. It's a bit of a reach. Now, in theory, the recount starts Friday. They're going to work through the weekends, and they can complete the recount before the Electoral College, unless there is a contest of the recount itself, in which case Michigan will not make the deadline to be part of the Electoral College. This is what's going on here. Nobody's expecting the recount to reverse the results in the 3 states. Hillary's game here is to take Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania out of the Electoral College by tangling them up in Florida 2000-style legal proceedings, so that going into the Electoral College, the gap between Hillary and Trump is much narrower, so that only a handful of electors who are being threatened or bribed or blackmailed can flip from Trump to Hillary and hand her the White House. That's their game plan. That's their game plan. She's going to steal the White House, and she could trigger a civil war with all this nonsense. And if she steals the White House, I can't imagine anybody except the snowflakes and the buttercups and the pansies and everything thinking this is in any way legitimate. Now, there's a story that came out of AlanBWest.com that you need to pay attention to. These are the actual numbers from the election. There are 3,141 counties in the United States. Trump won 3,084 of them. Hillary won 57, the counties that surrounded those huge urban centers with so many voters in them. There are 62 counties in New York State. Trump won 46 of them. Clinton got 16. Now, it's claimed that Clinton won the popular vote by approximately 1.5 million votes, but that doesn't stand up when you subtract out the dead and illegal immigrants. So, basically, where Hillary got all of her votes, with these huge, densely populated Democratic cities where there are all these illegal immigrants voting, and, of course, the vote riggers go to the high population density areas because it's easier to just have lots and lots of votes and people to work with close at hand. They're not going to go out and try and steal the election driving across rural America. So Hillary has not given up. Like Vampirella, she has risen from the grave and strides across the countryside. Recount, recount. It's not the recount she's after. It's preventing Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania from participating in the Electoral College. That's the game plan. That's what's going on here. Now, I understand Donald Trump's lawyers are getting involved, but the problem is they're up against that December 19th deadline of the Electoral College. Challenges from either side could make the states miss their deadlines to get their results certified for the Electoral College. And that's what Hillary wants. That's why Jill Stein waited so late to start this, to run out the clock, so that even if Trump's lawyers get involved, it simply drags out the legal process all that much more. That's what they're trying to do. This is Florida 2000 all over again. And remember, after Florida 2000, the government promised they were going to fix the election system. Did they ever do it? Of course not. That's why we're in this mess again. Because we have a national election system designed to facilitate and conceal election fraud. That's what's going on. Now, Obama is already out there saying, no, illegal immigrants voted in the election. He can't possibly know that. Because of all during this year, Democratic lawyers went all across the country knocking down voter ID laws in state after state after state. A lot of this was funded by George Soros. So you don't have a factual basis for saying no illegal immigrants voted in this election. Meanwhile, you've got votefraud.org and truethevote.org are both saying millions of non-citizens voted in this election. Hillary's people are out there saying, oh, but she won the popular vote. She won the popular vote. She should be the president. Do you remember during the primaries when Bernie Sanders kept winning the popular vote, but somehow Hillary got all the delegates? Did you see Hillary stand up and say, well, we should respect the popular vote, and I'm going to give some of my delegates to Bernie Sanders? Do you remember seeing her do that? Of course not. She never did. Because the elections are a contest about electors, not the popular vote. Now then, Donald Trump has picked Elaine Chao to run the Department of Transportation, his latest appointment there. Now, do you remember the story that came out yesterday where Donald Trump said that, well, you know, there should be a penalty for burning the American flag. And I don't know if he means the Obama flag, but that was it. And the media jumped all over him. Oh, no, burning the flag is a form of free expression. It's protected by the First Amendment, and the Supreme Court says so. And Trump trolled them all because all he was talking about was the same exact law Hillary Clinton proposed back in 2005. And back then, when Hillary was proposing the Flag Protection Act of 2005, the corporate media was, oh, yes, the flag is sacrosanct. We should never burn the flag. And by the way, I'm absolutely in agreement. We should not burn the American flag unless we need it as kindling to burn some politicians with it, and we can't find anything else. That's the only exemption I have to that particular rule here. We're going to take a second to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And the corporate media is still out there upping the ante, as it were, on this fake news witch hunt, which is really just another form of attempts at censorship, control over what you see, what you know, what you hear, what you see. It's the modern electronic version of the Nazi book burning, is what they're doing right now. They can't stand the idea that people go out and find information for themselves, that they're going to think for themselves and decide for themselves. Obama was out there lamenting that you, the American people, have access to way too much information. You should only have access to the information the government's going to hand to you. You should be forced to be dependent on the corporate media and not allow any competition, the way you're forced to be dependent on the Federal Reserve for your cash. Dependency is slavery, and that applies to information as well as to money, as well as to products and so forth. And by the way, a little reminder here, as the corporate media stands up and tries to cloak itself as the real news that you can trust, we do need to remember all the way back that time when the Washington Post actually ran the CIA's propaganda network as part of Operation Mockingbird. They had a huge network of controlled assets throughout the corporate media, the top executives, some 3,000 all told. And they ran this since the end of World War II. Now, a lot of people who were on that list put out by the Washington Post, citing this website, Prop or Not, that was set up only last summer. Its owners are anonymous. It's registered through a private registration company to conceal who really set this up. And they put up this list of all these websites that are fronts for Russian propaganda. And of course, no proof. It's just, a smear job is what it is. It's McCarthyism all over again. Oh, they're part of the Red Menace. You should shun them. And a lot of these media outlets, independent media outlets who are on that list, are now considering lawsuits for defamation. And they're talking about suing Prop or Not. If I were them, I would sue the Washington Post. They've got more money. And if it goes to class action, I'm definitely going to be joining on in because I was on that list. And it is defamation. When you go on out and say that somebody is a Russian stooge and you have absolutely no proof to back it up, that's defamation. And I don't think the Washington Post could successfully mount an absence of malice defense in this particular case, given their editorial positions on the independent media in recent weeks. Now, Truth in News has acquired a private citizen willing to donate a $10,000 reward payable in Bitcoin for the names of the people behind this Prop or Not website. If you know who they are, you can go to Truth in News and file a report, and if it turns out to be right, you're going to be $10,000 richer. And we will hold these people up to the scorn of the public. Story coming out of Washington's blog, as opposed to Washington Post, basically talking about, before Hillary Clinton lost the election, they were openly talking about finding ways to shut down the independent media, to remove your freedom of choice as to where you would go to find out what this country is doing, what the government is doing. We used to have laws to protect diversity of opinion. Now they're going the other way. You will listen to Pravda and Izvestia and whatever the Nazis called their newspaper back during World War II. Like I said, we're witnessing the updated digital version of the Nazi book burning. Das ist the fake news. Das ist the fake news. Sieg heil, sieg heil, sieg heil, sieg heil. Now, Associated Press has just issued an edict to all of their Associated Press reporters that from now on, whenever they're talking about Donald Trump supporters, they will always be labeled as the alt-right. They're trying to create a new mythic bad guy. Ooh, that's the alt-right. You don't want to pay it. Ooh, remember when Hillary was doing the vast right-wing conspiracy? They're trying to bring that one back. They're trying to imply there's something wrong with being alternative, which is why I prefer the term the independent media. It's amazing how obvious it is. The more I see this going on and escalating, I am just deathly afraid this is going to end up with violence in the streets of America. And I would love to find a way to avoid that, but I think the establishment understands this is, from their point of view, it's an all or nothing fight. They're either going to establish their tyranny, their dictatorship of information and politics, or they're going to collapse. From their point of view, they're fighting for their survival. And they're blaming the independent media. We didn't set out to attack the establishment. The establishment has been committing suicide with lie after lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. And we should not feel sorry for them at all. Now, apparently over on Newsnight, they did a segment saying that the Brexit vote in Great Britain and Donald Trump's election victory are somehow undemocratic. It's the end of democracy. Apparently, democracy is only valid when it serves the establishment, the elites, the money junkies. When the people stand up and actually act like a democracy, oh, it's undemocratic, those people, those voters, what were they thinking? Populism is the core principle of democracy. And it's amazing how undemocratic we're seeing our current political, media, economic establishment act in this crisis. They're trying to wear the cloak of being somehow democratic, even as everything that they do is exactly the opposite, like our modern Nazi book burning here. Now, Donald Trump's war with the corporate media is escalating, and he's pointing out that CNN has become even more abusive since Donald Trump won the election, which we've all seen in all the corporate media. It's hardly confined to CNN. They all bet the farm on a Hillary Clinton victory. They bet their reputations on it. And they suffered major, major damage. Their phony opinion polls were exposed. Their predictions of a Hillary victory were a huge embarrassment. But don't expect any of these people, except for Sean Hannity, let's give him some credit. Don't expect any of these people to stand up and say, okay, we were wrong, and we're going to start telling you the truth from now on. They're not. Their business model is they make the millions of dollars they make for being very convincing liars. That's their business model. And now it doesn't work anymore. If there is one thing we can point to as a success of the independent media, it is that we have taken away from the government and the corporate media their ability to lie to the public with impunity. And even silencing the independent media isn't going to change that. The American people are now skeptical. They're distrusting. And they ought to be. You should never trust government, because it is the government. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. The media loves to call Trump an idiot. Oh, he's an idiot. He's a dummy. He's an idiot. Well, dear corporate media, Trump is a billionaire and you are not. Trump is now president-elect and you are not. Donald Trump is relevant and you most certainly are not anymore. Remember when Hillary Clinton was trying to tarnish Donald Trump, saying, what kind of a successful businessman loses $1 billion in a year? And then Trump came back and said, what kind of a Secretary of State loses $6 billion? All right, let's talk about the war zones. Things are heating up, not getting any coverage here in the corporate media. Turning over to Syria, Aleppo is on the verge of being liberated, back under the control of the Syrian government. The civilians are trying to get out through the humanitarian corridors. The U.S.-backed Syrian rebels, who are still stupid enough to be in there, are shooting at the civilians, trying to kill them as they flee to the government-held areas. And that's another embarrassment for the corporate media, who for 5 years have been screaming how the Syrian people hate Bashar al-Assad, how they welcome the liberators, they'll give them hugs and big, wet, sloppy kisses. And now, of course, we're seeing the civilians of Syria glad to be free of the U.S.-backed terrorists and grateful to be back in the embrace of their own elected government. Now, right now, it looks like a third of Aleppo has been cleaned of all these terrorists. And it's accelerating because more and more of these terrorist groups are accepting the amnesty offer. They're surrendering their weapons, they're pledging their loyalty back to Syria, and they're going home. Now, yesterday we were talking about a very alarming statement that Turkey's President Erdogan made during a speech about how Turkish military forces have entered northern Syria to end the rule of the tyrant al-Assad. Now, I read a full translated transcript of his speech, and in reading it, I almost got the sense that Erdogan was just mouthing off and not really thinking about what he was saying. But, of course, it has caused a stir around the world. Russia is now demanding that the government of Turkey explain those remarks and has called for a meeting between Sergei Lavrov and Turkey's foreign minister to say just what the heck is going on. Now, whether Erdogan or not is going to invade Syria to go after Assad is problematic, because Erdogan has to know that any promised U.S. military support for a war against Russia will evaporate likely the day after Donald Trump takes office. I have a feeling that Erdogan is going to back down in his meeting with Russia and come back and say, well, no, I was just mouthing off. I think he's going to back down on this one. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the war zones. We're talking about Syria. Now, as you know, when the United States undertook to overthrow Bashar al-Assad about 5 years ago, the original excuse given to you was Bashar al-Assad was evil. Bashar al-Assad, leaves his keys in the car. Bashar al-Assad passes wind in elevators. Bashar al-Assad tap dances barefoot on shag carpeting. And he's a bad, bad person, and we have to go deal with that. And then, of course, they had those horrible embarrassments of trying to claim that Assad was gassing his own Alawite supporters with banned chemical weapons right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived. And, of course, the one thing they couldn't come up with was a reason for Assad to do something that's stupid. And ultimately, the United Nations said, no, this is being done by these U.S.-backed rebels. They're doing the chemical weapons attacks in order to blame Bashar al-Assad. So at that point, the U.S. story changed. They actually thought you were not going to remember what they had said just a few weeks ago, and it became, oh, we're not in Syria to make war on the Syrian people. We're not in Syria to make war on Assad. We're there to fight the global war on terror, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda are in Syria, and the U.S. should have known because the U.S. was supplying them. And even though the U.S. kept saying we're there to strike at the terrorists in Syria, the actual attacks always seem to hit critical Syrian infrastructure, pipelines, food storage, water processing plants, things like that. And every time the U.S. came out with the same thing, oh, we're sorry, mistake, horrible, horrible mistake. You're just being picky about this stuff. And they're still at it. Last September, U.S. forces attacked Syrian soldiers and killed dozens of them. And everybody was up in arms about that, and now the U.S. official position, unintentional error. We really made a mistake. I don't know what's wrong with our gunners and our pilots. They've all got terrible, terrible eyesight. We've got a shortage of pilots, and we're having to put these people in that've got the little white canes and, the seeing eye dog in the second seat in the airplane. And, these things are just going to happen. Call it the fog of war. So they're still out there attacking Syrian forces and telling you that it's all about dealing with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They really do think you are all morons when it comes down to it. Now, Vladimir Putin has just authorized sending mobile military hospitals to Aleppo because some of the civilians have been injured. And he's sending the mobile hospitals to provide medical assistance to residents of Aleppo and the residential areas near it. Meanwhile, the U.S. government, which has been mouthing about their concern of the wounded civilians in Aleppo, hasn't really sent anything. Now, Congress right now is debating next year's defense budget. And in there is an allocation for $350 million worth of lethal assistance, meaning things that kill people, to go to Ukraine. $350 million worth. That's a lot of lethal assistance to prop up their puppet ruler, Poroshenko. And once again, we're starting to see the propaganda ramp up against Iran. And you've probably seen in the corporate media how Iran nearly provoked a war with the United States of America. Gosh darn those Iranians. And what actually happened is a U.S. military helicopter was flying just off the coast of Iran. This is a military helicopter. And apparently one of the Iranian patrol boats along the coast aimed a weapon at the helicopter to warn it off. It did not fire. And even the U.S. admits the crew of the helicopter did not feel threatened by what was happening. They just veered off and went their way. And this corporate media is out there saying, this is a dangerous provocation. No, a dangerous provocation by Iran would be if Iranian military helicopters were flying off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. Then you would have a case for an Iranian provocation. Do we see Iranian ships in the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of Baja, California? Do we see their aircraft over our airspace? No, we don't. We know who the provocateur here is, and it's not Iran. Remember, Iran has not launched a war of conquest in over 200 years. It's not their nature. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the war zones here, something just crossed my desk here. As we see Hillary attempt to hijack the 2016 election and steal the White House for herself, it turns out the solution to this entire crisis can be found back in 1878. Because the U.S. House of Representatives has the power to impeach Hillary Clinton, which would disqualify her from holding any public office. And they can do it even though she's out of office because back in 1878, the House of Representatives successfully impeached Secretary of War William Belknap after he himself had left office. So we just put up this story here. There's a petition to be signed, not that anybody pays any attention to petitions, but that is another possibility. The House of Representatives is dominated by the GOP. They could still move forward with an impeachment of Hillary Clinton, which would immediately disqualify her from holding any public office. She's already lost the election. You know, she's rising from the grave like a vampire. The House of Representatives has it within their authority to drive that wooden stake and sprinkle garlic all over her. Now then, getting on back to the war zones, more U.S. troops have arrived in Yemen. Remember when we were all told, oh, that's just an argument between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, and yes, we're giving Saudi Arabia all the weapons, but really it's just between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And, of course, there's already a contingent of U.S. forces fighting in Yemen's south, supposedly against al-Qaeda, but we know what's really going on. The people of Yemen tried to eject their imposed U.S. puppet rulers, and the U.S. is going back in there to slap the Yemeni people around and say, you will accept your puppet rulers and you will like it, with all of the attendant bloodshed and destruction appertaining thereto. And now more U.S. forces are on the ground in Yemen. We know who the aggressor is in this age. It's not Russia, it's not Iran, it's not Syria, it wasn't Iraq. It's the United States of America. I know most people still don't want to deal with this, but the fact is that right now we're the bad guys. And 50 years from now, the world will look on the stars and stripes with the same revulsion that our generation looks on the swastika. I don't want to see future generations of Americans growing up with that imposed collective guilt that we see in the people of Germany, although they're breaking free from that, thank goodness. But that's where we're headed with this. Meanwhile, Israel has bombed Lebanon again, claiming it's against Hezbollah, but they're bombing installations along the Beirut-Damascus highway. Just hauled on, off, and flew into somebody else's country and dropped bombs. Trying to put more pressure on Syria here. Now, dealing with the wildfires that they're having over in Israel, and they're very nasty, as is the one in Tennessee. When the fires first started, Netanyahu came on out and said it's acts of terror by the Palestinians. Then the Palestinians sent their own fire trucks and firefighters in to help deal with the blazes, and we started finding out that the fires had actually started from settlers trying to burn the Palestinians' olive groves and being dumb enough to do it in a high wind. Well, apparently that's all fading away, and Netanyahu is now back to saying that the fires are all the fault of the Palestinians. He's not being very specific, saying fires, Palestinians, fires, Palestinians. And Palestinian supporters are saying this is just a continuation of Netanyahu's strategy of incitement. He is trying to fan up the conflict to get somebody to do something he can use as an excuse to launch yet another attack into Gaza, into the West Bank. Now, one of the things Netanyahu did that drew a lot of criticism around the world was they passed a law banning the call to prayer by Muslims. And there are a lot of Muslims inside Israel and the occupied territories. And the law was passed because supposedly the call to prayer was waking up the Jewish population, who like to sleep in, I guess. And at the same time, of course, it is going to be confusing the Muslims as to when they're supposed to show up for the prayer. Well, it turns out it wasn't a big deal anyway, because already there are smartphone applications for Muslims to have on their smartphone that will tell them when it's time to assemble. The call of prayer is now virtual, online, and Netanyahu can sleep late undisturbed now. Now, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have dropped another bombshell. This is 500,000 U.S. cables dating back to 1979. And what is contained in there is more evidence, confirming evidence, that ISIS was created primarily by the Central Intelligence Agency in concert with Saudi Arabia and some other players. But it was a CIA operation. We needed this enemy. We needed this proxy, this evil presence who would go in and do bad things to these countries that we wanted to do, but we're supposed to be the good guys. And, of course, to wag at you, the American people, to convince you to give the government what remains of your money and all of your children for these wars against evil ISIS. ISIS is in Syria. We've got to go into Syria. Whoops, we bombed a food storage facility. Our bad mistake, but we're going after ISIS. Oh, sorry, we blew up a water purification plant. Another mistakes happen, but we're there after ISIS, and on and on and on. Now, a lot of people have had their eyes on OPEC these last few days because, as you know, there was this disastrous oil price war that has put Saudi Arabia on the path to bankruptcy in 3 to 4 years. And OPEC finally did what everybody expected them to do. They're cutting production by 1.2 million barrels per day, down from the current 33.64 million barrels per day. So it's, a few percentage points, but it's enough to send oil prices up. And you're going to feel it eventually at the gas pump. And I got to tell you, I was listening to one of our local radio stations, and they were doing the news here, and this guy comes on out and says, OPEC is reducing oil supply, and he says, but don't worry, you're going to benefit at the gas pump. And Claire and I both had this, incredible, irresistible force of gravity between our forehead and the palm of our hand and saying, ooh, what is this guy saying? Does he actually think about what he's reading off that piece of paper they put in front of him? No, cutting production is going to drive oil prices up, and everything that is dependent on that oil is going to go up in price as well. Now, yes, this is going to help those nations struggling with the lowered oil prices, going to help Venezuela, going to help Canada, going to help the fracking industry, but it is not going to be a benefit to ordinary people, and you might as well get used to that right now. There are a lot of idiots in the corporate media. They don't even think about what they're being told to broadcast. You could put just any nonsense in front of them, and they'll just say it. Now, pardon me, not too long ago, Donald Trump convinced Ford to keep more of their auto worker jobs here in the United States instead of sending them to Mexico. Now, 9 months ago, there was a video that went viral from the Carrier air conditioning people, where they were informing their workers they were all being let go because the air conditioning plant was going to move from Indiana to Mexico. And it actually became a focus for Trump's America First plans. Now, today, according to CNBC, the Trump team and United Technologies have reached an agreement to keep those 1,000 factory jobs at the Carrier plant in Indiana. Now, it's a token amount. Let's be honest. We've got a population of 300 million Americans. We've got 94 million legal citizen Americans looking for work. 1,000 is just a drop in the bucket, but it's a start, and it is an indicator that Donald Trump understands a reality. If the American people do not have high-paying jobs, they don't have money to go to the shopping malls and buy Christmas goodies. They don't have the money to buy new cars. They don't have the money to buy homes. They don't have the money to pay taxes. They don't have the money to pump back into the economy at the bottom to keep the top propped up. He has a wisdom on display that has been totally lacking from our professional politicians for well over a decade. And it's another reminder what a good idea it was getting a businessman into the White House instead of another career politician who's tangled up with the CIA's cocaine and gun-running operations. Now, Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying that the way things are headed, the U.S. paper dollar should be reduced to the level of toilet paper. Well, it's not there yet, but it will be soon. We're seeing Weimar-style inflation happening in Venezuela. They don't even count the money anymore. They just weigh it. And as more and more countries pivot to Russia and China, and Marine Le Pen's success in France signals that France may be ready to pivot to Russia. Foreign demand for the U.S. dollar is going to crater. And we are hearing rumblings, and this is a revival of something they were talking about back in the 1990s, of actually having two different U.S. currencies. An internal domestic currency, which is not allowed to leave the country, not allowed to go across the borders, and an external only U.S. dollar that would be the global trade and banking currency, except that one is not probably going to be well accepted at this point. And if you think about it, it's not really a bad idea. We're being told that the war on cash is to fight terrorism and to fight the war on drugs. And if we, the American people, have cash that can't be taken outside the country and spent there, won't be honored, that solves that problem. And we're still allowed to have the freedom to decide where our wealth is going to go. You know, we're going to be able to stop off at the bakery on the way home from work and buy a jelly donut without our bank knowing that we're violating our diet. Because we're inherently private people about things like jelly donuts. All righty, we're going to go ahead and start taking phone calls, and we're going to start with John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I don't know if you remember, but on November the 9th, I did warn you about the rising enthusiasm for Donald Trump and what was going to happen, and it's happening. They are trying to steal this. Just like they're trying to steal Brexit, they're trying to steal the election from Donald Trump via this recount nonsense.
Well, I'm absolutely in agreement, and I was kind of I think most Americans were hoping this nightmare was going to be over, but I think the giveaway was when Hillary finally did her sort of kind of maybe concession speech the day after the election. John Podesta made this cryptic remark, when he was leaving, and he said, "This isn't over yet." And so it appears they had contingency plans against a Trump victory, and if they fail on this recount, the goal of the recount is not to change the results of the three states, but to block those three states from participating in the Electoral College. If they fail on that, their next step will be an assassination attempt against Donald Trump, which is why this thank you tour that he has announced, it strikes me as an incredibly stupid idea. And it is a reminder of the comment I made. When he got into this race, I said, I like him. I like the fact that he's an outsider. But he is, in many ways, as dangerously naive about how dirty D.C. politics can get as Jimmy Carter was going on in.
Well, I fear that these things will drag on right until after, and I did say so, until after the 19th of December on that November 9th interview discussion I had with you.
Mm-hmm.
But what's more important is I'm looking at some of Donald Trump's picks, and I'm still nervous about the man. He promised to drain the swamp, but he's put in the swamp slime in his cabinet. He's put
one so far that is considered part of the inside group, but he's brought a lot of second-tier people. Remember, not everybody in the government is part of the swamp. The swamp is that core rotted area, and Hillary and Bush and their circle. That's the swamp. Not everybody employed by the federal government is part of the problem, and I think Trump is trying to weed those people out. So far, he seems to be resisting pressure to take on Mitt Romney as Secretary of State. I'm sorry that Tulsi Gabbard is now out of the running there. I think Petraeus does have the foreign policy chops to be a good Secretary of State. But the most important thing is it's finally been admitted that the New York Times story claiming that Trump was not going to criminally investigate Hillary Clinton or the foundation turned out to be a complete fabrication.
Absolutely. But the other thing that notes, the most important person in his cabinet is going to be his Attorney General. And if Trey Gowdy gets the job, I'll completely change my opinion of Donald Trump.
Well, it looks like Trump may be going another direction. Actually, don't forget that probably the most powerful position under Trump is the White House Chief of Staff, and that's Reince Priebus, and I think probably Trump put him there because he's already thinking about 2020 and running for re-election again, especially with Hillary announcing she's going to try again then.
Well, I did suggest that it would probably be a good idea if Mr. Trump left Trey Gowdy in the Congress in his present position, because he has proved to be an excellent attack dog against this Clinton corruption and crime spree.
Well, we need more like him. You know, we need more like Dan Burton and Bill Posey and Trey Gowdy and all of these people. And hopefully Trump's victory has emboldened those members of government who are sick and tired of living with this image of nonstop, top-to-bottom corruption. And they're going to stand up and say, there are still some good people in this government, and we're going to band together and try and fix this. And again, as I said, anybody thinking Donald Trump is going to make everything better all by himself, you're delusional. We, the American people, are going to have to stand shoulder to shoulder with President Trump. We're going to have to glare through the windows of all those senators and representatives and send them a message. You work for us, and if you don't, we're going to do to you next election what we just got done doing to Hillary Clinton. Okay?
Well, I think that the quickly getting to the war zone, Michael, I think this...
Well, I'm afraid we just ran out of time, John. I'm sorry. We're going to have to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I got an email from a viewer on BAM User. Yes, the T-shirt says Hillary for prison. And I wore it out this morning, and I forgot to change for the show. And no, I'm not suddenly a Hillary supporter. Who would be a Hillary supporter at this point? All right, let's go back to the phones. Dorothy in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I have a beautiful view of optimism about this recount. I don't want tomatoes thrown at me for having this optimism, but I did read up on Jill Stein and the Green Party, and I heard that whatever money that is given to her, donated, because we know it's in the millions, used for the recount, the Green Party keeps. Well, I'm seeing this as a bigger picture. Clinton sees that she can't win, but in 4 years, have you ever heard of the term controlled opposition?
Yes.
So in 4 years, after, of course you've heard of controlled opposition, in 4 years, there'll be a new set of voters, younger. They did go through liberal school. I hate saying that. Hopefully the corporate media won't have that much control over what can be said, truthfully, or intruthfully, I should say. And I sort of see it as the U.S. becoming I think with this whole big mess with Jill Stein and the recounts and everything, I really think it's just aimed to make the Green Party bigger, because a lot of people are going to be just leaving the Democratic Party.
I disagree on that, because the Green Party has already disavowed Jill Stein. They're out there saying that they want no part of this, that they don't want the blame. It's making them look bad, especially because Jill Stein is obviously acting as a front for Hillary Clinton. Jill Stein cannot win the presidency no matter how many recounts are done. Even in all 50 states, she couldn't possibly win. Okay? So she's doing this to benefit Hillary Clinton, and the quid pro quo is Hillary has probably told Jill Stein that if Hillary is able to steal the White House, Jill Stein will be a member of the cabinet or something else equally important. That's what's going on. Now, Jill Stein, of course, if this recount thing fails, any unspent money that was donated goes into her campaign war chest, and if she decides to retire from public life, she basically gets to take that money with her.
That's where it goes? It doesn't go into the party itself?
Yeah, it's at the discretion of the candidate. Most candidates tend to do that. When they retire from public life, they'll take their unspent campaign war chest and they'll donate it back to their party or their favorite party member. But the law actually is that the candidate can choose to simply take that money with them as kind of their golden parachute.
That's a shame. I hope that angers more Americans. Oh my gosh. I wish there was some way to get... I tell everybody about your show. I wish there was some way to just connect with more people.
Well,
let
we're
them know
connecting
what's
with
going
more.
on.
We're connecting with more. Our numbers are going up even as the corporate media goes down. And I'm not the only one. Audience all across the independent media. The readership is soaring. I think people are using that list the Washington Post put on out to go and visit sites for the first time. It's the Banned in Boston effect is what's going on here.
Yes, I see that. I did the same thing.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that validation there. We got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back with hour number 2. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Let's talk about the immigration issue. It is really becoming a major problem in Europe, and again, you're not going to see this on the TV network news here. There was a massive rally in France against Islam, and the issue isn't really the religion per se. The issue is that this crowd of refugees has poured into Europe, and instead of adapting to Europe's standards, have been going around demanding you must make your country look just like the country we ran away from. And the indigenous Europeans, of course, have been very upset at that. They see it as very, very rude. And they're absolutely right. I mean, in this country, Theodore Roosevelt laid it on out, saying if you want to come here as a legal immigrant, you are welcome. But by coming here, you agree to abide by our laws, speak our language, follow our rules, and adapt to our culture. Now, nobody's saying you're going to have to convert from Islam to Christianity, because religion is a personal, private thing in your home. But, you know, running around and demanding that the entire country convert to your religion, your laws, that's very rude, and it has provoked a tremendous, tremendous backlash. Along with the fact that these refugees are a huge drain on the social services of those countries. These refugees don't seem to have a lot of skills. Those that do have skills are taking jobs away from the indigenous Europeans. It's not like Europe had a labor shortage before all of this started. Europe was a lot like the United States of America. A lot of people unable to find work for weeks and months on end. Now, up in Sweden, in Gavle, or Gavle, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's in central Sweden. And they have this rather interesting tradition every year where they build this straw goat figure in the middle of their town. And they call it the Yule goat. It's supposed to represent a friendly spirit who looks over the town and brings blessings and so forth. It's very, very large. In fact, more than 3 tons of straw went into it. And it's put up to celebrate the beginning of the holiday season. And less than 24 hours after it was unveiled, an unknown party or parties had burned it to the ground. Now, over in Stockholm, they have one of these what are called no-go zones, where the refugees are so totally out of control that neither the citizenry or even law enforcement dare goes in there. And apparently there is an epidemic of car fires. Refugees, just for the heck of it, setting fire to cars. And videos are coming on out of just streets where there'll be 2, 3 cars on fire. More than 70 cars have been destroyed in this single no-go zone in this very famous liberal city. And I have a feeling they're not going to be liberal much longer. Of course, you know what the definition of a conservative is, right? It's a very tired liberal or a liberal who got mugged. Now, Merkel is trying to hold the EU together, and now all of a sudden she's dealing with the reality that her own country is starting to talk about a Grexit. The latest poll is showing nearly half of Germans want a European Union referendum. 2/3 of the German people are unhappy with life under the control of Brussels. They want out. Marine Le Pen is talking about a Euro exit referendum. down in Italy, huge protest there. 50,000 people protesting in the streets of Rome trying to bring down Renzi, who's pro-EU, and he's facing a referendum this weekend. He's trailing by 11 points, and people are very, very concerned that if the referendum fails, 8 of Italy's top banks will collapse, and that could be the beginning of the chain reaction that takes the entire Eurocentric ECB banking system down. Now, up in the Netherlands, where they've already voted once to leave the EU, and the government said, well, we don't really have to listen to you. But they're coming back again, because right now they're coming up on their elections. And the PVV, led by Eurosceptic Geert Wilders, is gaining in the polls. They're topping the polls right now. This is a populist revolt against the elites, against the money junkies. Ooh, look at the rain come down. Alrighty, now then, what's going on in Europe? There's a very good analysis over in the Express in London, the Daily Express. And we're going to take a second here to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about immigration. We're talking about the European Union. We're talking about how more and more member states of the European Union are starting to strain at the leash, or strain at the slave chain, probably a more accurate metaphor, because the EU turned out to be a raw deal. It was sold to the people of Europe as just a free trade zone. No borders, no passports, free trade across the borders. That's all it was supposed to be. And it is metastasized into this tyrannical central government up in Brussels. And the predations of the European Central Bank and the euro have impoverished the European Union. Most of the nations are hopelessly in debt. Great Britain and Germany are literally holding the entire system up at great expense to their people, which is why the Brexit vote won by a landslide, despite all the election rigging. And now with the refugee crisis coming on in, the open borders are going away. So for the people of Europe, right now the European Union is all downside and no upside. If you go to anybody and say, you know, what are the good things about the European Union? They're going to go, I don't know. We don't have the open borders anymore. You know, our standard of living has declined. We're flooded with refugees who are causing all kinds of problems. Really isn't working out for us. So over at the Daily Express, they have a story about saying goodbye to the old guard and saying that the European Union is paying the price for the domination of old war horses. In other words, people who've been in politics their life and they're getting on and they're set in their ways. And you know, there's the same thing is going on here in the United States of America. Because our inner government, the institutional government, not the elected officials, not the appointed officials, the institutional government is still filled with all these old Cold War fossils who still yearn for the glory days of wagging Russians at you to get your money and the lives of your children. And they were very, very late waking up to the reality of the independent media and the Internet and the free exchange of information outside the control of government and corporate media. They really didn't get the message until the election this year. And now they're reacting in a panic. And, you know, fresh blood, young blood, fresh ideas is a good thing. In Europe, here in the United States of America. Now, for some strange reason, ever since Donald Trump won the election, foreign donations to the Clinton Foundation, in fact, all donations, have pretty much plummeted. And it turns out the Clinton Foundation received millions of dollars from Angela Merkel's government. We don't know what the quid pro quo was for all that money. Now there's a movement in Germany to force Merkel to demand a refund. This is not a joke. And use that money to deal with the illegal migrants. And of course, Merkel doesn't want to go there. She is still pushing this integration of all humanity into a single blob of workers for the New World Order. I am very surprised Merkel is going to run for re-election, as unpopular as she is. She probably figures she'll buy twice as many vote riggers as Hillary Clinton had, and it won't be a problem. Now then, you've probably been hearing about how poorly our government has been treating our veterans, our wounded veterans. And we posted 2 articles on the website just a few minutes ago about the rather luxurious and silly things the VA is spending money on rather than taking care of our veterans. And a flashback to the Inspector General's report on how something like 300,000 wounded veterans died waiting for treatment by the VA. Where's the money going? Well, we've always got money for the illegal immigrants and the refugees. And so it is with some alarm that we're seeing this story where the Department of Health and Human Services has been forced to start raiding some of its accounts, including Medicare, the Ryan White AIDS HIV program, cancer and flu research, to cover the shortfall in housing these illegal immigrant youths coming over the border at the rate of 255 a day. The shortfall is $167 million per month. Your tax money that you paid for things like Medicare, research into cancer and flu, things that benefit the American people. And instead, they're literally pillaging that money to keep this illegal immigrant refugee program going. Even knowing that the illegal immigrants and refugees were a major reason for Donald Trump's victory. They're trying to load it up as much as they can before Trump can get in there and try and reverse it all. Now, people are still talking about this knife attack at the Ohio State University. And it was a knife attack, not a gun attack. When the corporate media first came out, active shooter, there's a gun there. Oh, it turned out to be a knife. The gun grabbers were all crying. They thought they had another bloody shirt they could wave in their gun grabber campaign. Didn't work out that way. And everybody's jumping on board. ISIS is now, or somebody pretending to be ISIS is now claiming they're responsible for this guy, this student, doing this. And he may have been inspired by them. Here's where it gets weird. And this is where liberalism has really gone off the edge of a cliff. Ohio State University has a diversity officer. That's a real position. They have an officer in charge of diversity. And the longer we stay here, diverse it gets. And this diversity officer is out there actually urging sympathy for this Somali refugee terrorist who slashed up a bunch of people. Oh, just think of his feelings. I mean, he was so upset about how the world is treating Muslims. We have to look at this through his eyes. No, we don't, actually. I think Donald Trump is a lot closer to the spirit of America when he's out there saying, this guy should not have been in our country to begin with. We're just opening the borders and letting people in who are infectious, criminal, borderline crazy. Donald Trump is right. This Somali attack on Ohio State University is a condemnation of Obama's open borders policy. Just like all the problems they're having in Europe. But George Soros wants a single world government and all of humanity blurred together so they have no sense of an identity, of cultural, regional, historical identity, just whatever they get from CNN today. And he's still pushing that. And we're going to see more and more of injuries, deaths, misery caused by all of this. Because George Soros, like so many other money junkies, thinks that having that amount of wealth confers a divine right to treat planet Earth and all of its population like their personal toys. And I'm absolutely opposed to that. George Soros is not an elected leader of this country. he should not be allowed to have any influence at all, despite his money. In fact, to be very honest, George Soros has made himself into the greatest argument for socialism I've ever seen by showing what individuals with way too much money are capable of doing in terms of mischief and tinkering. We know Soros was behind Hillary and all of that going on when Hillary's lawyers were going across the country to strike down the voter ID laws so that 3 million non-citizens could vote, according to votefraud.org. Soros was paying the bills. Soros was funding Black Lives Matter, that were out there using violence to coerce a political change, which, by the way, is a violation of the USA Patriot Act. Why isn't Soros in handcuffs? Well, for the same reason that Hillary isn't in handcuffs. We live in a multi-tiered society where ordinary people like you and I are held to the letter of the law. And people with wealth and power, it's like the new nobility. They can't be punished no matter what they do. You probably heard of this historical lady, Ursula Bathory, the Countess Bathory. She's the real-life inspiration for the female vampire characters, Vampirella. Just like Vlad Tepes Dracul was the real-life inspiration for the Dracula vampire image. And Ursula Bathory was a serial killer. And she loved to dispatch her victims, usually young women from villages that were on her land, in very creative ways. One example being she would lock them naked in a cage outside the castle in the dead of winter so that they'd freeze to death overnight, which is a very, very painful way to go. Under the laws at the time, she couldn't be prosecuted because she was nobility. They literally had to change the laws of the country in order to finally arrest and prosecute Ursula Bathory for what she was doing. And we're heading into that same situation here. If you have enough money and enough influence and power, you get away with murder, vote rigging, things like that. I don't want to live in a country like that. I don't want our children to grow up in a country like that. No parent in their right mind would want their children to grow up in a country where there's an elite layer of society that can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and not be punished for it. This nation was founded on the principle of rule of law. The laws are supposed to apply equally to everybody, from the person making donuts down at the bakery all the way up to the president themselves. That's how it's supposed to work. That's what we're told we live in. And waking up to the reality has been a bit of a shock for a lot of people. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Katie in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I tuned in at about 3:20, so you may have already covered this, but I was curious as to what your take is on Trump's appointment of Stephen Mnuchin, I think you pronounced it, as Secretary of Treasury. Now, he said he was going to, clean the swamp, drain the swamp, and, he talked about all the banks and all like that. So he understands what's going on. Why do you think he appointed him?
Well, my understanding is that Mnuchin is actually opposed to the Federal Reserve. He thinks it's a bad idea. I know that in some of his writings and speeches in the past, he supported the return to a gold standard. So I would...
Okay, now, I don't think that's him. I saw something on your site last night, I think, and this wasn't Mnuchin, this was somebody else who had written something in the Cato Institute. So I was just real surprised. Now,
I'm going to have to go back and look at Stephen Mnuchin and see what his background is. And I'm sorry if I got confused because I thought this other person had the job. I'm going to have to go back and look at that, okay?
Okay.
All right, so thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come on back, apparently there may be a day in court for some of the private contractors that committed the acts of torture on behalf of the United States and the CIA in places like Iraq, specifically Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo. The U.S. had contractors to do this so they could say, no, our government doesn't torture people. We just write paychecks for those who do. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And in response to that last caller, during the break, I went on out and took a look. And, yes, Donald Trump has named his chief fundraiser, Steve Mnuchin, to be the Treasury Secretary. And Steve's credentials, he used to be with Goldman Sachs, which a lot of people are saying, see, it's the swamp, it's the swamp. Well, Steve was actually an IT guy and not really into the stock trading himself. So, again, we need to understand the swamp is that core of corruption, and not everybody in the federal government is corrupt, and not everybody at Goldman Sachs is a criminal. Usually it's the ones up at the very top. And again, let's see how they perform. But I still maintain, Donald Trump at his worst is still far better than Hillary Clinton at her best. And time will tell us whether or not this is going to work. My goal in this whole election was to bring an end to this narcocracy, which has had an iron grip on this country ever since Iran-Contra. And that's that Bush-Clinton duopoly. This election this year was supposed to be Jeb Bush against Hillary Clinton, so it didn't matter what you voters voted for, the narcocracy would continue in power. And now they've been knocked loose, and that's why they're panicking. Everybody tangled up in that web of drug money corruption, they're all panicking. Because Donald Trump might actually start a real war on drugs. And that would be inconvenient. Now then, I teased this story before we came on in to the commercial break. The United States, in order to try and maintain the illusion of complying with the Geneva Conventions and so forth, contracted out the torturing of prisoners. And Obama admitted, yeah, we tortured some people, no big deal. Yeah, it is a big deal. Okay, we tortured a bunch of Iraqis to death to find weapons of mass destruction that never existed. There was a movie that came out about this called The Green Zone, where there's this soldier who's out there and he's on one of these crews that is being sent everywhere that a tortured person says there are weapons of mass destruction, and it always comes out nothing's there, nothing's been there. They're going to old abandoned warehouses full of bird poo, which shows that people haven't been there for years. And at the very end, there's this wonderful speech. I think it's Matt Damon was the star of this thing, and he says, what happens the next time we need the world to believe the United States? Which is really at the heart of it. So anyway, there is a lawsuit now that is going after two of these contractors who carried out torture on behalf of the CIA, and they were identified and named, and they're aiming to hold them legally accountable, and they should be. And you need to understand something very important. Torture does not produce actionable, reliable intelligence. You talk to any serious intelligence professional, they'll tell you the same thing. All torture produces is a politically expedient confession. So the government can say, well, see, they confessed to doing whatever it is we said that they did. Remember Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11. How do we know? Well, he confessed. We only had to waterboard him 187 times to get his confession. We only had to lock his children in dark metal boxes with stinging insects and let him listen to their screams. And then he confessed, and that's why we know the confession is real. But torture is illegal under international law. It's even illegal under U.S. law. But it has been going on, and it's time to hold the torturers to account. Now then, as I mentioned before, the Congress is debating the 2017 defense bill. They're going to be giving $350 million in lethal aid to Ukraine. One of the interesting developments is that this defense bill is dropping the requirement for women to register for the draft. And this is something I very much agree with. Of course, I don't want to see a draft at all. I don't want to see any wars. But there are very important economic reasons not to be drafting women into combat. More about this when we come back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show. And we were talking about how in the 2017 defense bill, they're dropping this proposal to have women register for a potential military draft. Now, obviously, I would like to not have a draft at all. I would like us to pull back from this war agenda, especially because, in all probability, the U.S. is going to lose this next one. And I'd like to avoid that. But that being said, I think there's a very good reason to not have women drafted into combat roles. Now, if you're a hardcore feminist and you want to enlist and volunteer, go for it. That's great. We have a family member who is on the command track in the U.S. Navy, and she's doing very, very well there. But the reason to not draft women, and I'm going to get a lot of nasty letters from the feminists on this one, has to do with economic recovery once the war is over. Because that nation that is most rapidly able to rebuild their population of workers will have an economic advantage in the post-war world. That's the reality. And if you draft women into combat and they're being killed off, that negatively impacts that post-war birth rate and places you at an economic disadvantage. So I'm glad they gave that up. And again, this is not to say that women can't serve or shouldn't serve in combat roles if they so choose, especially in the more mechanized fields where their physical strength isn't a factor. Pilots and so forth. Now then, let's see. Story just came across the desk here. This is from the Microsoft Network News, and it has to do with a young lady named Sherry Papini. And she disappeared for 3 weeks, and she was found along a road on Thanksgiving Day in an absolutely horrible condition. She had been kidnapped. She had been beaten repeatedly. She had been branded. Her hair had been chopped off, and apparently she was thrown from a vehicle with a chain around her waist that was attached to her wrists and a bag over her head. Papini told police her captors were 2 adult Hispanic women armed with a handgun and driving an SUV. So, now then. All right, let's take a phone call, a couple of phone calls. Ralph in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I want to ask you a question. How much Star Wars the public is going to swallow?
It's a fun film.
That's my main question.
It's a fun film. I was actually working
It's like George Lucas's hair is getting grayer and grayer. It's like it's pathetic.
Well, it's a franchise that's taken off, and is now separate from its creator, the way Star Trek is. I mean, Roddenberry has passed away a long time ago, and Star Trek will continue, just like people keep making movies about Robin Hood and all the rest of it. We'll see Star Trek continue into the future. Star Wars.
He's just saying that the millennial generation actors in Hollywood are horrible. They're not even bringing the passion of show business no more.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the current political makeup of Hollywood. When they did that last one that was supposed to be part of the original prequel with its very obviously multiracial cast, it did feel like everybody was just kind of in there feeling that they were there just because they had the right color skin, and they didn't. It wasn't inspired, and the direction, to be very honest, was a little bit weak. Now they're doing the spin-offs like Rogue One, which has nothing to do with the original Star Wars story, the same way that Deep Space Nine had nothing to do with the original Enterprise,
exactly,
and so forth and so on. But they're a lot of fun, and mostly because we love a good, ordinary people against the evil empire kind of story. And to give you an insight into how Hollywood thinks, I was actually working at 20th Century Fox when the original Star Wars was released. And believe it or not, 20th Century Fox had another science fiction film out that same summer called Damnation Alley, which was this environmentalist thing, and it featured this giant all-terrain vehicle called the Landmaster, which was an impressive piece of hardware. Fox management actually thought that was going to be their runaway blockbuster hit for the summer. They got absolutely blindsided. They thought Star Wars was just too silly to catch on, and of course it became an intense phenomenon.
And another question also, Dr. Steve Pachenik said that Hollywood is a dying institution. It's no longer creative the way it was in the last 40, 50 years.
Oh, absolutely.
It's dying.
Absolutely.
It's dying.
It absolutely is. Hollywood is a great place to be if being in Hollywood is what you want to do. But, I mean, going back to the McCarthy blacklisting, all of the top creative people got driven out of the business, and Hollywood's product quality declined. And we're seeing the same thing here. I mean, my own experience back in 1994, when I pointed out the photo that was being in the corporate media proving Vincent Foster committed suicide, had problems with it. And so their very best minds, the people who are going to see the mistakes, the people who are thinking outside the box, they all get kicked out. And Hollywood is just full of all these politically correct propagandists who are sitting around congratulating themselves. And meanwhile, the focus of filmmaking has shifted to New Zealand with the Lord of the Rings. China, India has a huge filmmaking industry. Europe is really taking off. You're looking at some of the top series on TV right now, like The Vikings and Game of Thrones. Those are all produced in Europe. Hollywood is not the center of filmmaking anymore. And they like to go on pretending they are, but they aren't. It's a tourist attraction these days.
Well, the Chinese are taking over the top 3 studios right now, according to confirmation, right?
Well, they may, and for a while, Japan tried to do that as well, but when they find out how impossible it is to actually manage those studios and track where the money is really going, they may bail, because that actually happened back in about the time of Waterworld. Japan was trying to buy up all these studios, and they just couldn't deal with the amount of corruption that was going on, and they bailed out on that. But
the passion of acting is a dying institution, actually, right?
Well, you know something, when I was teaching and I was involved in theater and everything, I used to tell people, if you love acting as a craft and an art, then stay with your community theaters, go on up the boards and just act your heart out. People go into film and TV not because they're passionate about the art form, but because they want stardom and they want to make a lot of money. If you look at, for example, the Sundance Film Festival, you will find there are some very excellent movies being made by people who care about filmmaking, but they're unable to get distribution, and they don't really care because they're talking about politically incorrect subjects. And by the way, Leah Remini has a new series on A&E where she's going after the Scientologists. And apparently she just funded this out of her own pocket for the most part to put this show together. And I've seen half of the first episode. I had to stop and do something else. But she's really going after them. And those are scary people.
Wow.
Yeah. When I was going through that whole situation with the company that was in the CNN Hollywood building, that building was also home to some of the Scientology offices. In particular, their cyber warfare people, the ones who'd hacked into the FBI, and they were very scary. They're walking around in uniforms like they're, Air Force commandos or something, and they are very, very scary people. But for a while there were a lot of people in Hollywood who felt you couldn't be a star in Hollywood unless you joined the Church of Scientology, and Scientology did go after celebrities for that very reason, like Tom Cruise and John Travolta and a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, one last question. Even actor Steven Seagal said that Hollywood is nothing but a cannibal house. He said that Hollywood is no longer the passion of actors the way it was in the last 40, 50 years in the era of John Wayne.
It's all about money and product placement and everything.
And now he's a Russian citizen now with Putin. It's amazing.
Well, here, let me share something from somebody who was inside the industry for about 30 years. The weird thing about Hollywood is you go and you run around and you get to know people. You're going to discover that everybody in Hollywood is either a complete, total saint who is really there because of love of the craft, or they're an absolute shark who is there for the money and the power and the free sex and all the goodies, and there's very little in between. And it's a very weird sociology. One of the nice things about working on a film or a TV crew is that, there are going to be some sharks up at the top and people that you don't want to deal with, but everybody who's there is really there because they want to be there. They worked very hard to get there, to get their union cards or whatever it is. They really want to be there and they want to do a good job. And that's that's a kind of shared experience that you don't find in a lot of other areas of endeavor, like building cars or working in an office and so forth. So it is a very interesting experience, and I enjoyed most of what happened to me in Hollywood. But it is highly politicized because it is seen as a tool to manipulate the population, and that has been true going all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover.
Okay. Hi, Mike. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to switch to Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. What book, magazine, or video turns you from the left to the right?
I don't know that I was ever strongly left. I was raised Republican because my grandfather, I'm a hereditary Republican on my grandfather's side. He was drinking buddies with Dick Nixon. I sort of moved center during the two Bushes before I really began to understand what the root core of the problems was really all about. And I like to think of myself as a centrist, judging the issues and the candidates on their merits. But if I had to give myself a description, I'm a paleocon as opposed to a neocon. I'm a paleocon in the original idea of what a conservative was, government minding its own business, leaving the people to themselves, and a minimalist approach to managing the nation.
Somebody went to Gary Allen and threw a bunch of books on his desk, and he says, "I challenge you to read these," and he turned from the left to the right.
Well, there are some very convincing books out there. Mostly it's about breaking through the mythology. And by the way, that works both directions. Both the liberals and the conservatives have a very carefully crafted mythology. I mean, they're actually a little like Scientology themselves. And once you see through the mythology as to what's really there, then you sort of have a tendency to get on out. I always say that I've been studying the Republicans and the Democrats very closely for 22 years now, and anarchy is starting to look attractive.
A friend of mine says, "Come on to our house, I want you to listen to a tape of Sherman Skolnick in Chicago." I did, and I wrote for his material. Then I started buying books from the John Birch Society, and it just, he turned me, I said, "Who is this guy? You know, he's talking about Kennedy, and he's talking about Rockefeller." I wonder, what's going on here? And I started reading at that point.
Well, that was, Sherman goes all the way back to the beginning of what we call today the independent media, even before the Internet was out there. And there's always been people trying to educate the public about the truth of what's going on. Only the technology changed, shortwave and so forth. Even back in Nazi Germany, they had the Order of the White Rose, which were these students who had a clandestine printing press, and they would print up pamphlets saying, this is what's really going on inside the Nazi Party, and they would run along the rooftops in the major German cities just flinging handfuls of these brochures into the streets until the Nazis caught them and beheaded them.
Just like Robert Welch, started John Birch Society. He was a reader, and I try to read all the books that he had, and I go from there. And I go to a John Birch Society bookstore, and I just buy this, buy that. But now I buy, that's trails. I do trail studying, But I go back to the 70s, studying since the 70s, and I still find books that I've never seen before.
Oh, there's a lot of material out there. There's a lot of material out there.
Yeah.
More of it needs to be put online.
Yeah, right. That's one thing I see is they take books you can't find and put them on the Internet. You print them and put them on the Internet. Some books have been put on the Internet that you can't find. That's good.
Yeah, well, right now, though, we're starting to see where the search engines are blocking requests for certain things here, which is why we need to start using search engines that are hubbed in other countries like Yandex. There's a huge opportunity there for new search engines and new social media, and they're sprouting up all over the place, and they're already starting to capture a huge share of the market away from these established social media, which have been exposed for censoring and filtering and working with the establishment to keep us under control.
Did you ever try Start Page?
Oh yeah, I actually did the animation on their TV commercial. It's on their website, in fact, where the water the water washes up over the image at the beach and everything. I actually did that for them.
Sometimes I get on the internet, and the page will black out on me. And when you put the words in, that blacks out on me. So wait a minute, something's going on here. It's like when you go, I told you when you go to the library, put that little blue azure light on that thing. They know about it at CIA and NSA. They probably got a big bullhorn that Ken's back on the internet, you know, and see what he's reading. Sure.
All right, well, listen,
if they want to.
Keep on reading, Ken. Keep on reading. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to the black Trump supporter in the Northeast, and I assume you have some kind of an update on the recount, because you called in the other day about Jill Stein still having a shot at Pennsylvania.
Yes, Michael. Okay. So I just read that a judge blocked the recount efforts in Montgomery County. But I think this is for the second part. Remember, there's 3 ways they could do it. This is the second one where they get a whole bunch of people to sign the affidavits or whatever. Now, they missed deadlines for some of the counties, but some of the counties had different deadlines up until the 28th, I think, was the last one for all of them. So I think this is where that is. But there's still, I think the third way, they're using it together with the third way, which is they're going to go in on court on Monday and present the evidence of the voter fraud or whatever. And they're saying, well, what is their evidence? And it's supposedly pieces of paper, affidavit with people's names and a letter from these so-called computer experts and expert voting into machines, hacking into machines, these so-called experts.
Well, so it's going to come down to whether the judge is a Clinton supporter, like that judge down in Florida that threw out Larry Klayman's lawsuit. But again, they're not concerned about the recount. They just want to tangle up all 3 states in legal Gordian knots so they can't participate in the Electoral College. Have to let you go here. Got to take a break for commercial. We'll be back with more calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I just found Trump supporters' story here. A Montgomery County judge is rejecting Green Party-backed requests for recounts of presidential election results in about 78 precincts. Judge Bernard Moore gave no immediate reason for the rejection, and a lawyer for the voters who made the request says he doesn't know yet whether they'll appeal. Probably they will, because the game here is not the recounts themselves. The game here is to tangle up these 3 states in Florida 2000-style legal tangles so that they cannot participate in the Electoral College, narrowing the gap between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump to where just a handful of bribed, blackmailed, threatened electors will go faithless and try and steal the White House for Hillary Clinton. Hillary and her people are making a mockery of our entire system. Even if she loses, even if she wins, people are going to look at the American election system and say, this is not democracy. And again, especially if Hillary fails. If Hillary succeeds in stealing the White House, she's going to keep the election system exactly the way it is. If she fails, we should take this as a warning call. We have 2 years to demand a complete overhaul of our election system, of how votes are counted, tabulated, verified, and yes, there needs to be voter ID. If you're not a citizen, you shouldn't vote. And both votefraud.org and truethevote.org have said at least a minimum of 3 million non-citizens voted in this last election. All right, let's go back to the phones. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Wow, that's if she, I can't see her stealing it, but if she does, it'll be impossible for her to govern. If that happened, I mean, it would be a total fraud.
Absolutely. I'm not going to listen to her. I'm not going to view the government as legitimate.
Those 3, I don't think she'd have the armed forces behind her or anything else either. If she did something like, there is no way. But if this happened with those 3 states, wouldn't it just they would postpone the electoral college then?
Well, unfortunately, that date for the electoral college is set in the Constitution. I think that would be a good idea. I mean, the reason for the spaced out timing in the Constitution was when the Constitution was written, horseback was the fastest means of communication. I think there is no practical, technical reason why that Electoral College couldn't be delayed, especially with the presumptive winner already forming his cabinet and administration. But whether or not they could do it, I'm certain that Hillary would go to court and say, no, you follow the Constitution. This could wind up in the Supreme Court. This is worse than Florida 2000. It really, really is. Anyway, Mark, got to let you go. Got to do a station identification. We'll be back with more phone calls. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And I know we got some calls waiting, but I'm going to get some news in here because I got a lot of stuff to cover, and I really need to get back to it. Over in Philadelphia, somebody decided to put some graffiti on the wall that said F Trump and decided to take a selfie of it. The video got out, and the guy writing the graffiti, F Trump, turns out to be a city lawyer for the city of Philadelphia. They are such children here. Now then, a little bit of good news. The United Nations has rejected Great Britain's second appeal against the United Nations ruling that Julian Assange's exile to the Ecuadorian embassy come to an end, saying that he's been subjected to the effectively arbitrary detention, and it's time to restore his liberty, protection, and enjoyment of fundamental human rights. That may have been the reason Assange has kind of been below the radar for the last couple of weeks as he was waiting for this thing to be finalized. But the United Nations has basically ruled that Assange can go free. All right, getting on back to other news here. Here is a story that came out of Bloomberg, and it shows that the corporate media is, in fact, still up to their old tricks. The headline reads, FBI and NSA poised to gain new surveillance powers under Trump. Insert ominous music here. Then you read the actual story, and it's talking about a new rule that is due to go into effect tomorrow that allows the FBI more latitude in terms of getting permission from a judge in a single jurisdiction to hack into multiple computers whose locations aren't specified. So note that deceptive headline. This is a rule that goes into effect tomorrow, yet it's under Trump. Trump's to blame. Now, the Boston Police Department is planning on buying a $1.4 million social media spying tool that will basically go in and discover who your network of friends and associates are, and performing what they call sentiment analysis. In other words, what are you thinking and feeling based on what you're tweeting? Well, I got to tell you, given the brevity of a tweet, I don't know that a lot of sentiment can get in there. I hope it's a little more sophisticated than a keyword search, because that's going to lead to a lot of false positives. But it's open for bidding right now. Okay, let's see. Let's take 2 phone calls, and I'll get back to the news here. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. If Germany were to decide to leave the EU, it presents a linguistic problem in that I don't think they're going to want to go with Jerksit and might rather settle for like Deutschsit, which is a bit odd, but sounds kind of cool if you say it 5 or 10 times.
Well, I don't think the name they call it is really going to be all that important because, they're calling it Gexit now.
How can it be? They're not even getting to the first consonant, so I think
it doesn't matter. You know, a cry for freedom by any other name would smell as sweet.
Just trying to have a little fun with it. If you're going to have all this, unpleasantness, you may as well have some fun with the language.
Okay, we'll try and do that. We're going to switch over to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Speaking of fun with the language, I'd like to officially request that we change the name of the mainstream media to the vomit stream media.
That would be a good one. I've actually heard that described before, but we don't call them the mainstream media anymore. They're the corporate media. because the mainstream has shifted away from those corporate news outlets. Their audience numbers and ratings are in the Al-Qaeda. CNN is pulling fewer viewers than the Gardening Channel right now. So they're coming over here. The audience, readership numbers, viewership numbers for all of the independent media outlets are moving upward. Republic Broadcasting, Drudge Report, Alex Jones, WhatReallyHappened.com, the numbers are going up.
Yeah, you've got me well trained. I always call it the corporate media from now on, but I'm going to switch over to Vomit Stream. The 100 most damaging WikiLeaks, I didn't give a proper reference last time, so it's www.mostdamagingwikileaks.com. Awesome site, very well presented, very easy to read.
We have linked to it.
Everyone should go.
We have linked to it. I'll put it back up on the site as soon as the show is over. All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. And
one more thing, please.
Real quick.
Okay, vaccines. When you have your seasonal flu shot, if it comes out of a multi-dose vial, they use mercury as a preservative, and if it comes out of a single shot, there's no mercury in there. Just for people that are on the fence, you just want to start with eliminating mercury. And I got your caller before said something so important that if the vaccine gets injected into the blood vessel, that can cause an adverse reaction.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to have to let you go. We're going to have to do a shout-out for our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. And, Mike, I need you to play music for just a minute. Claire's got some kind of an emergency. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Emergency taken care of. Claire was, well, she was excited. Let's just leave it at that. And further deponent saith not. All right, getting on back to the news here. There's a very interesting article that came out of Brass Check TV, Danger U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at Work. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers is one of the major players in the laying of this Dakota Access Pipeline. And this article starts out by reminding everybody about what a poor job the Army Corps of Engineers did on those levees down in New Orleans, many of which collapsed during Hurricane Katrina. And by the way, the Dakota Access Pipeline has mounted a major PR campaign to demonize the protesters and say they're all criminals and they're all doing this and they're killing the buffalo and they're, doing all these bad things here. It's a PR campaign going on. What you need to understand about this is the Environmental Protection Agency said this Dakota pipeline plan was too dangerous and they refused to approve. And despite this, the Army Corps of Engineers went right ahead with this project. Now, we're looking here at a situation where it's not just the water supply for the Sioux Reservation that's at risk. If you look on a map at where that water goes after it leaves the reservation, there are a total of 4 states that this water is flowing into. And again, I was listening to our local radio station where our newsreader was out there saying, well, pipelines are the safest way to do it, and really, that's just a silly thing. Well, we understand pipelines are a little safer than trucks and tanker cars on railroads, but they're still not safe. And there are reasons to run these pipelines in areas where leaks will not compromise public health, and that's really what this is all about. And ultimately, it's a fight between corporate interests and the rights and the health of the people who live there. There's been another injury involved in the confrontation between the water protectors and the police. Apparently, one of the water protectors was shot in the eye by a tear gas grenade. Now, you're not supposed to aim those grenades at people, but it's becoming more and more a common tactic for the police to do that. Remember, during the Occupy Wall Street protests, there was this one very tragic case where police at point-blank range shot a protester in the head with a tear gas grenade and fractured his skull, caused permanent harm. Now, the local sheriff's department has decided that what they're going to do is impose a $1,000 fine for anybody bringing in food and supplies to the protesters at Standing Rock. And they're saying they're going to put up roadblocks. delivery trucks, retailers, anybody, they're either going to turn around or have to pay a $1,000 fine, trying to starve them out. Next, I'm sure they'll be handing out those smallpox blankets to those Native Americans. Now, at this point, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is saying it's time for the Department of Justice to thoroughly investigate the reports of brutal and abusive police tactics employed against the water protectors, opposing that Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. Now, on the other side, we have Washington State Senator Doug Erickson says that protesters should be redefined as economic terrorists, because once they're terrorists, we can torture them and we can throw them in the gulags. How dare you get in the way of corporate profitability? What's wrong with you people out there? Meanwhile, over in Nigeria, thousands of Nigerian fishermen have mounted a class action lawsuit against Shell because the oil spills that were caused by Shell have destroyed the fishing grounds. There are no more fish. They've all died off. These fishermen are now without a livelihood, and they're suing Shell Oil. And it is a reminder that these oil companies are not particularly careful with their hardware, as if we didn't already know that from the Deepwater Horizon disaster. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Mike in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Michael. Just a couple of things. I had overheard that Hillary was looking at another run in 2012, and I guess that kind of ends the discussion whether or not they've got life extension technology.
Well, I got to tell you, I think they put that out there to sort of sell the idea that Hillary is already looking beyond this election, even though it's very obvious she still thinks she has a shot at the White House through the Electoral College. But to be very honest, if in fact she does have Parkinson's disease, she is not going to be able to run in 2020. I mean, she's already advanced in years. She had serious problems dealing with stamina issues. For this election, 4 years from now, it's only going to be worse.
Well, that and the other thing, I think the day of the event up in Ohio, there were reports that there was a young man getting out of a car with another man who I believe was his handler, because this guy had no background, no history, no reason to do anything. And the reports were that there was a shooting, which would lead you to believe it was the perpetrator doing the shooting, but it was actually the cop who was already there ready to kill the guy. So they've got the Johnny on the spot ready to become a hero, Johnny on the spot for killing some guy with a pocket knife who's been programmed to stab some people.
I'm sorry, what are we talking about? Oh, you're talking about the Ohio State University?
Yeah, the guy had a handler. He'd come out of a car with another guy, and then the guy filters off into the crowd as this was going on. They don't seem to want to talk about the guy that was with him.
Where did you see that? Where did you see that?
It was reported the day of the event.
By whom?
I have a friend that lives up.
Oh, okay.
I have a contact that lives up there that has friends that witnessed it.
Well, if you can find confirmation of that online, that would certainly be interesting. But for me, the fact that this Somali carried out this terror attack on the same day that Obama redefined the war on terror to include targeted killings in Somalia, to me that was kind of a dead giveaway that this thing was some kind of a false flag.
Well, the fact that they didn't find the guy that was with him is kind of telling, and just his whole demeanor is such that I think the guy was, wound up on something or some type of a drone. But here's another thing to realize. The mainstream or the corporate media, I'll get it correct here in a minute.
Thank you.
The corporate media is they're losing audience. So in order to grab that audience to be able to get their customers who are the corporations paying for ad space, in order to keep an audience for these ads, they have to put out product. So they're creating, I believe, product, which is these terroristic acts, so they can do wall-to-wall covering this so that they have people watching, so their customers, their corporate clients, get viewers to their commercials.
Well, if it bleeds, it leads. If it thinks, it stinks. And it also gave the corporate media a reason not to be reporting on the ratcheting up of tensions between Turkey and Syria and all these other embarrassments that are coming out of Aleppo. So it is all controlled. And again, despite the faux repentant editorials put out by the Los Angeles Times and all these other corporate media outlets, they are not changing their business model because they're paid the big bucks to control what you think, and they don't want to stop that. And that's why they're on the warpath against the independent media, because we've broken their monopoly on the dissemination of information.
Right. And as far as the folks up there at the protest at the Dakota pipeline, somebody needs to fly over with like a little Cessna 172 and toss out some bags full of goodies to give them encouragement. I don't believe they've blockaded the skies yet, so there's ways to get food in. And back when the natives took over Alcatraz Island and declared that their sovereign territory, they were still getting food in. People just found ways. They have to find ways to do this.
I'm sure that's going on already, and I'm sure they're using, their the fact that it's their home court advantage. They know where all the little gullies and valleys are. But everything the government is doing to try and shut this down, it's a PR disaster. Because after seeing that huge oil spill over in the southeast about 2 months ago, I think, the Deepwater Horizon disaster, people understand there is a legitimate concern about these pipelines not being perfectly safe because the oil companies don't want to spend the money to make them perfectly safe.
Right. They could actually go over the river. They don't have to go under. They could go over. Here's another thing. Trump, all he has to do is vocalize opposition to this pipeline going through this sovereign land, and that would just be the thing that would stop it instantly, and that would give him so much credibility. And it's the right thing to do because, literally, they don't. It's exported oil. All that oil is going to be exported. None of it will benefit people in this country. Period.
Yeah, that's an important fact to keep in mind. Absolutely. All right. Well, Mike, thanks an awful lot for the update. We're going to let you go here. And now that we mentioned this the other day, but I'm going to mention it again. Apparently, people who work at companies like to think well of their companies, just like we want to think well of our government. And there's a little bit of a problem going on. We all remember that movie, the Interns, about Google and what a great place Google looked like. Same thing with Facebook. And the Facebook employees are having a crisis of conscience as Facebook becomes more and more overt in the censoring of their users in support of Hillary and the establishment. Facebook employees are actually resigning their positions. And that is a real act of courage for two reasons. One, it's a tight economy, even in Silicon Valley. Finding another job's not going to be easy. And Facebook could easily retaliate by giving these people a bad reference. But at some point, I guess you just reach a situation where you can't take anymore, where you can't live with what's going on, can't live with what you've become a part of, whether it's Facebook censorship or that show by Lee Remini about Scientology, where all of a sudden you realize the reality behind the facade and you're not comfortable with what that is. Now, as I mentioned before in the show, the exposure of the overt censorship by Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, all of these have opened up a new opportunity for brand new social media to get their foot in the door. We've been talking about Scene Life, Gap, or rather Gab, my mistake, and a whole bunch of others are popping up, and people are flocking to them because they don't want to reward Facebook and Google and YouTube for behaving in a manner opposite the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Now, from the point of view of these companies, their attitude is we're a private company. The Bill of Rights doesn't necessarily apply here until you realize these companies and the services they offer have reached the point of literally being a public utility that the population has come to depend on. So, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a new social media platform, now is a really good time to do it. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'll tell you what is really needed right now is we need a social media that runs peer-to-peer, that doesn't go through a corporation's centralized servers, but bucket brigades from machine to machine to machine. Because that couldn't be controlled. It couldn't be censored. That's really what is needed. I'm going to put some thought into that one. Now then, there's another story. This is coming out of The Guardian over in Great Britain, where there is now a hue and cry for social media companies to implement technology to bar young people from sending explicit messages, sexting, and so forth. This would be software of some kind that would target under 18s that would be blocked from sending sexually explicit images, and so forth. Well, implementation issues aside, I think it's a lot safer for kids to play you show me yours and I'll show you mine over the cell phones, as opposed to in person, where they have the risk of things getting out of hand, resulting in pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases. If you really think about it, all kids go through that phase of discovery. Why am I different than this other person over here? It's inevitable. And if it's happening on the cell phones, from a parent's point of view, then you're avoiding that risk of pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, aren't you? I'm not sure they thought this all the way through. If they block it on the cell phones, the kids will just get together out behind the barn and do it the old-fashioned way. Now, as I mentioned, it looks like Julian Assange is finally going to leave the Ecuadorian embassy, thanks to a decision handed down by the United Nations over the strenuous objection of a lot of statists. Now, apparently, 15 former staff members of the Church Committee, this was the 1970s congressional inquiry into illegal activities by the CIA, have written a letter to Obama saying it's time for Edward Snowden to be brought out of exile, because Edward Snowden blew the whistle on illegal activity by the U.S. government. And he needs to be protected and brought home. What is very alarming is, even after the drubbing of this election, we're not seeing a lot of repentance or change of style by the government. In fact, there's a very funny story here where you probably have already heard Nancy Pelosi defeated Tim Ryan's challenge for minority leader in the House. Kellyanne Conway came on out and said, what a relief. I was worried they had learned from the elections and might be competitive and cohesive again, which is very much tongue-in-cheek. But what she's saying is they're not changing their methodology. Despite the disaster of this last election, they're not changing how they do things. They're going to go on making the same dumb mistakes over and over and over and over again. Now, as you know, 'tis the season for snow, and snow is starting to fall all over the place, New England and all the rest of it, which it's winter. You expect snow, unless you are part of St. Al of the Gore's First Holy Church of Human-Caused Global Warming, in which case you are reading the scripture from the March 20th, 2000 issue of The Independent, which promised us snowfalls are all a thing of the past. So there's a very interesting story that came out of thinkprogress.org about how there's a new study that declares global warming is real. And it bases that on the fact that temperature of the Earth's land has risen by 2.5 degrees over the past 250 years. Sound the horns and the fanfare. They prove the Earth got warmer since the end of the Little Ice Age. Better start polishing up a Nobel Prize for this one. What a brilliant, inspired piece of scientific research. I think all of us understand that, yes, the Earth did get warmer after the Little Ice Age. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I've just been informed by one of our listeners that there is, in fact, a peer-to-peer social networking system. It's developed by the Free Software Foundation, which anybody who's into development understands. Apparently it is not caught on because people don't know about it. You know, Google had the movie and Facebook has all the advertising. But in this era where people are turning away from those established ones, this looks like a very good situation. It's called Diaspora. I just posted the link to their page where you can sign up and set up a pod, which is a router on your machine that allows the social media information to be passed back and forth. It's completely decentralized. There is no one point where they can come on in and start censoring things. So I'm certainly going to be looking at this and signing up because the time has come. The time has come back to go to decentralization. The entire Internet, or originally the ARPANET, was built around a principle of decentralization so that communication could not be blocked or interfered with or censored or stopped. Of course, it was never intended for ordinary Americans to have access to. Government keeps all the really good stuff for themselves, of course. But great minds think alike. This is a peer-to-peer social world, and I'm definitely going to be looking into that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Now, getting back to human-caused global warming, NASA has released a video from their Solar Dynamics Observatory, which is showing that the sun is in a very, very quiet phase. It's in its lowest level of activity since 2011. And it is on its way to the solar minimum. But scientists in Europe and Russia are saying there are other longer solar periods that we've never been able to study because we haven't studied the sun for all that long. And we're going to see an overlap of the low points of 3 of these cycles over the next decade. It's going to be a new Maunder minimum and a new little ice age. And certainly that's what we're seeing. All of those warnings from the global warming people, the polar caps are going to be melt, the Arctic will be ice-free by 2014, the polar bears are drowning. None of it came true. None of it. It was a complete hoax to trick you out of your money for carbon credits and carbon taxes, to trick you into obedience to letting some global environmental authority tell you how to live your life, to save Earth from you icky-poo human beings. Now, over on Chippewa County, they're dealing with an economic crisis. Governor Scott Walker is now asking the U.S. Department of Agriculture for a disaster declaration for 10 western Wisconsin counties, including Chippewa, Eau Claire, Trempealeau, and Jackson, that were hit hard by a frost last May. And it damaged the fruit crops, grapes, berries, and apples, asparagus, and hops for the beer. And this was a very, 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 very late spring frost. They'd already planted the crops. They figured winter was over because Al Gore told us it was. And they suffered huge economic damage. And now they're in need of a bailout, because they were believing the official line about humans are warming the earth. And they planted before spring really actually got here. And remember, the Old Farmer's Almanac is saying winter will be late this year, but it's going to be very, very hard. And the Old Farmer's Almanac has an amazing track record of accuracy. I remember when I was a kid growing up in farming country in New Hampshire, that book was the second most important book after the Bible. Now, over in Syria, which you would tend to think is desert country, their temperatures are below average right now by anywhere between 2 and 4 degrees, according to the meteorological department. And it doesn't seem like much, but once again, it indicates the earth is not warming. It really, really isn't. Now, on the commercial break, I was watching Fox News, and Barack Obama, of course, in his last days in office, he's worried about his historical legacy. How will he be remembered? What will be in his presidential museum? And I did send him those puppets from Mitt Romney and Obama that would punch each other when you pulled the strings. And I actually got a very nice thank you letter on that. And obviously, he is not going to be victorious in Syria before he leaves office. And he's worried about his legacy. And he's out there, again, in true liberal fashion. None of this is his fault. It's all the fault of somebody else. In this case, Obama's current target is Fox News. And Obama is out there saying that he would have been a great president if it wasn't for Fox News. Fox News was a wing of the GOP, like CNN wasn't a wing of the Democratic Party. You know, it's good when we do it. It's bad when you do it. You don't understand how these things work. So he's out there whining and trying to find some blame and worry about his legacy, because his legacy is going to be hideous debt, wars that are doomed to end in disaster, Obamacare, complete violation of the Bill of Rights in unbridled surveillance on all of the American people. Have I missed anything? Probably. Almost doesn't matter. Now then, in August of 2015, there was a big stink regarding a company called Turing Pharmaceuticals and its then CEO, Martin Shkreli. They bought the rights to a drug called Daraprim, which treats a parasitic infection in people with weakened immune systems, pregnant women, HIV patients. And when they acquired the rights, Daraprim cost $13.50 per tablet. And upon acquiring the rights, they jumped the price up to $750 per tablet. It was a huge, huge stink. It sort of undermined the fact that our medical industrial complex is not about health. It's all about making money any way they can. Now then, down in Australia, where they don't have Common Core, high school students in their school laboratory created 3.7 grams of pyrimethamine, which is the active ingredient in Daraprim. That 3.7 grams at current U.S. prices would go for anywhere between $35,000 and $110,000 U.S. And it's another reminder, the actual cost of what's in those little bottles you get from the pharmacy is pennies. And the rest is profit. And the pharmaceutical companies like to justify it by saying, well, look at all the money we're putting into research and development to find cures. Except, of course, they never find cures. They're looking for more treatments. And their R&D is tainted by flawed studies, outright rigging. It's all about the money. And the medical industrial complex right now is absorbing what I think is a disproportionately large share of our gross domestic product. We shouldn't be indulging a culture in which everybody is on 10 to 15 prescription medications, and vast amounts of our nation's resources are pouring into this one sector of the economy. We need to go back to really thinking in terms of prevention of illness, instead of the current model of let them get sick, make them get sick, then they got to buy pills from us. The big pharmaceutical corporations seem to be operating at the same morality as the illegal drug traders or the weapons builders. It's all about the money. Now then, I've been talking about the documentary Vaxxed. When Claire and I signed up for Amazon Prime in order to watch Grand Tour, we discovered Vaxxed was available as a pay-per-view. It's about $4. It's still not available on Time Warner. Okay, but it was available on Amazon Prime. We watched it. I've bought a bunch of copies to give out as Christmas presents. Even knowing what it was about going on in, it was a shocking revelation of just how bad the problem is. At one point, Representative Dan Burton is grilling the head of the CDC about just what studies have been done to prove that vaccines are safe. And he asks a pointed question. Has there ever been a study comparing vaccinated to non-vaccinated children? And the head of the CDC launches off about R&D and studies and everything, and Burton pulls her back and says, no, one question. Have you ever done a study comparing vaccinated versus unvaccinated children? And the head of the CDC said, no. That has now changed. Apparently, there was a report of a study that was done comparing the health of school children, where vaccines are mandated, with children who are being homeschooled and not vaccinated. And what they found is the vaccinated children were 3 times more likely to come down with neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism. 3 times more likely. And it was published in Frontiers in Public Health, was accepted by them on November 21st. It has now been taken down. Frontiers in Public Health was apparently put under pressure, and their official explanation is we're having to reevaluate the study. We saw the same thing with that study in France, where they were feeding those rats on corn with natural corn, corn with glyphosate, Roundup Ready corn, and Roundup Ready corn with glyphosate. And they discovered starting at 4 months, the rats started coming down with all these horrendous health problems, massive tumors, reproductive difficulties, shortened lifespans. They ran the study for the entire lifespan of the rats. Monsanto, when they did their study, terminated the study at 3 months. Destroyed the rats and said, see, it's all safe. As we reported earlier in the week, documents have surfaced showing Monsanto was aware of a potential cancer link with glyphosate 35 years ago. Corporate media, the real news, still tells you vaccines are safe. Roundup is safe. It's wonderful for you. A little radiation is good for you. Those people out there saying that radiation is actually bad for you and you should be cautious about vaccines and Roundup, they're the fake news. You shouldn't listen to them. You won't buy products if you listen to the fake news. You'll be skeptical and cautious. We can't make money off of you if you're skeptical and cautious. So, same thing going on. According to Healthy Holistic Living, there has now been an acknowledgement in the Lancet that fluoride is a neurotoxin. And this gets back to that issue of fluoridation of water. Now, Hawaii stopped fluoridating their water back in the 1990s, but apparently there's a push down on the Big Island to reintroduce it, supposedly to help fight tooth decay, except that drinking fluoride has no effect on tooth decay. Topically applied, yes. Drinking, no. Fluoride was already known to be a mild tranquilizer, and now the Lancet is saying it is neurotoxic. It kills brain cells. So why were they putting it in our drinking water all those years? Well, they had a huge amount of fluoride to get rid of from building all those atomic bombs, because the feedstock for those centrifuges is uranium hexafluoride. And after they go through and they whiz it all around and get the uranium out, they had leftover toxic fluoride industrial waste, and they didn't know what to do with it. Oh, well, we'll find a use for it. We'll just put it in the drinking water and just spread it all around the country where it's not as toxic. And it's good for your teeth. And anybody who questioned it was denounced by the corporate media as a kook. I remember there was a James Coburn movie, Our Man Flint. And even in there, they were poking fun at somebody who didn't trust the water. Don't let them put fluoride in their water. Even in Dr. Strangelove, the officer who goes crazy and launches a nuclear war against Russia, he's talking there about the purity of water and all the... That was the image. Anybody who questioned the water supply was a nut and a kook. Tell that to the people of Flint, Michigan right now. We live in a country whose sole agenda is extraction of wealth from you by any means possible. We have a medical industrial complex whose business model depends on Americans being constantly, chronically ill, requiring constant, expensive treatments. Our products are designed to fail after just a few years, so you have to go buy another one. That's the country you live in. It doesn't matter how hard you work, you will be staying in the same place, buying the same products over and over again, buying the same medical treatments over and over again. You cannot move ahead on your work. So, I think that fits the classic definition of fascism, where corporate authority and the government are aligned together against the general population. That's where we are. We're not a capitalist country anymore. Especially when you look at all the bailouts and TARP and all the rest of it, where we, the people, are constantly being looted to bail Wall Street out of their own crimes, corruptions, and downright stupidity. All the way back to George Herbert Walker Bush and the S&L bailout, which started that whole ball rolling and allowed the U.S. government to tell other countries, you can put your money here. If you make money, you can keep it. If you lose money, we'll get the taxpayers to cover the losses. They're so generous, those American taxpayers. They won't ask any questions about why they're having to pay taxes to prop up ultra-rich financial corporations. They would never dare ask questions like that. Now, over at Chernobyl, as you know, following the meltdown, they built a shield, a shelter, over the ruined reactor to try and contain some of the radioactivity. It started falling apart almost immediately. So they built another confinement, larger, to put over the whole assembly, and it was built away from the reactor, and as of now, they have finally moved it and placed it over the Chernobyl reactor, and now they're going to cover up all the holes. They're going to be living with that problem for the next 100 years. The same thing with the people down in Fukushima. We'll be right back after these few words. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today here. We're talking about Fukushima. And Japan's trade ministry has now acknowledged that the actual cost of the compensation for the Fukushima disaster is double what they originally thought. It's going to run to $177 billion, plus the permanent contamination of the land and the cleanup costs, which are still skyrocketing out of control. They don't know where they're going to put all the water. All because some money junkie, back when the plant was being built, decided, well, we don't need to put those emergency generators up on towers, and we only need a short tsunami wall, you know. I'm absolutely convinced that we can make nuclear reactors work, oil wells work. We can make all of this stuff work, as long as the safety decisions are not under the control of the money junkies. Now, in a healthy country, the government is supposed to keep an eye on those things. But time and again, we have come to the understanding that all of these government agencies that are supposed to be looking out for us, that are paid by our tax dollars, actually see themselves as industry support. And nobody's really looking out for the nation as a whole, whether it's Japan or the United States. And that's why we have problems like Fukushima, the Deepwater Horizon disaster, Hanford. So, apparently the world's oldest person just celebrated their 117th birthday. Says they will not eat fruit or vegetables. Probably in this age of GMO, that's wise. Basically says she survives on 2 raw eggs a day. That's it. 117. Wow, that's amazing here. Myself, I want to live to be 101 and then be shot by a jealous husband. Russia is now developing a new, huge rocket. They're calling it the Mega Rocket, that will transport supplies to build a permanent base on the moon. Way to go. I love seeing this stuff happen, and with Donald Trump's new direction for NASA, I think we can and should get involved. Let's go back to cooperating with the Russians. That's how the space station got built. Let's partner with Russia, with the European Space Agency. Stop sneering at each other just because our politicians can't get along. Over in Kansas, there was a lawsuit where this lesbian couple used a sperm bank to father a child, which happens quite a bit. They got into financial trouble. It wasn't a sperm bank. They actually recruited a man through a Craigslist ad to donate sperm so these two women could have a baby. They got into financial trouble and sued the sperm donor for child support. And in a blazing streak of common sense, the judge said, no, of course not. He's not on the hook. And that's refreshing because back in the 1990s, there was a very similar case in California where the judge said, yeah, you're the father of the baby and you will pay for the kids. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I'm going to start playing with this diaspora. It's looking really, really cool. I'll have a product report for you tomorrow. We'll be back. Aloha, America.